The library closes at midnight, but they never announce it. The lights don't dim. No voice echoes through the stacks reminding stragglers that time has passed. Instead, the building simply empties itself, one by one, until only the most dedicated remain scattered among the long oak tables like ships anchored in still water. I've been here since 4 in the afternoon, though I couldn't tell you what I've accomplished. My American Urban History textbook lies open to page 237, the same paragraph I've been staring at for the better part of an hour. Something about post-war housing developments and the rise of suburban sprawl. The words blur together, becoming shapes rather than meaning, and I find myself reading the same sentence about federal loan programs for the third time. Across from me, Nathaniel Cross sits with his pen suspended above a yellow legal pad, the tip barely touching the paper. He's been frozen like that for several minutes now, caught in the space between thought and action. His dark hair falls slightly across his forehead, and I notice the way he occasionally pushes it back without seeming to realize he's doing it. A habit. One of many I've cataloged over the months we've been meeting like this. The heating system hums somewhere above us, a steady white noise that makes the silence between us feel less deliberate. Outside the tall, arched windows, snow drifts past in lazy spirals, catching the amber glow of the streetlights beyond. The city looks muted from here, softened by the weather and distance. It's the kind of snow that transforms everything it touches, making the familiar strange and beautiful. We've been here together since September, claiming this table at the far end of the reference section every Tuesday and Thursday evening. What started as a practical arrangement, two graduate students who preferred studying with company but didn't need conversation, has evolved into something I can't quite name. We work in comfortable silence, occasionally sharing observation about a reading or asking to borrow a pen. Nothing more complicated than that, except tonight feels different. Maybe it's the storm outside, or the way the library has grown so quiet I can hear the pages turning 3 tables over. Maybe it's the lateness of the hour, the way time seems suspended when the rest of the world has gone to sleep. Or maybe it's something I've been avoiding acknowledging for weeks now. The way I've started looking forward to these sessions not because of the work I accomplish, but because of his presence across from me. I turn another page without having absorbed a single word. The motion is automatic, performative. Nathaniel glances up at the sound, and our eyes meet for a moment before I look away, suddenly fascinated by the grain of the wooden table. There's a small scar in the oak near my elbow, probably carved by some long-ago student's nervous pen. I trace it with my finger, feeling the slight depression in the wood. The truth is, we stopped being productive hours ago. Our conversation has meandered from the assigned readings to memories of childhood winters, to the peculiar quiet that settles over the campus after dark. We've talked about movies we've seen, books that changed us, the strange intimacy of sitting in a warm building while snow falls outside. Nothing earth-shattering. Nothing that would explain the electricity I feel humming just beneath the surface of our ordinary interactions. I steal another glance at him. Nathaniel is 27, 3 years older than me, with the kind of steady presence that suggests he's never rushed through anything in his life. He returned to school after spending years working in his family's carpentry business, and there's something about his hands that speaks to that history, capable, precise, marked by small scars that tell stories I'll never know. Tonight, he's wearing a dark green sweater that makes his eyes look almost gray in the fluorescent light. He sets his pen down and stretches, rolling his shoulders back with a quiet sigh. I should be working. I have a paper due Friday on urban renewal policies, and I've barely started the research. But instead, I find myself watching the way he moves, economical and unhurried, as if he has all the time in the world. The heating system cycles off, leaving us in a silence so complete I can hear my own heartbeat. The snow continues its slow dance past the windows, and I realize we might be the only 2 people left in the building. The thought should make me anxious. I don't like being alone with my own thoughts, which is partly why I study here instead of in my cramped apartment, but instead I feel oddly peaceful. Then it happens. Without warning, without preamble, Nathaniel's hand slides across the space between us. His palm settles on my thigh, just above my knee, with a certainty that suggests this was always inevitable. The touch is warm through the fabric of my jeans, firm but not insistent. He doesn't look at me as he does it, doesn't pause or hesitate or give any indication that this is a question being asked. His hand simply rests there and the world tilts. I don't move. I barely breathe. The library around us seems to crystallize, every sound magnified and muted at the same time. I can hear the whisper of pages turning somewhere in the distance, the almost inaudible hum of fluorescent bulbs, the soft rhythm of my own breathing. But mostly I'm aware of the weight of his palm, the heat radiating through my jeans, the way my leg seems to burn where he's touching it. Minutes pass, maybe seconds. Time becomes elastic, meaningless. Neither of us speaks. Neither of us pulls away. His thumb rests against the inside of my thigh, not moving, not pressing, just there, present and undeniable. I should say something. Should ask what this means, what he's doing, what comes next. Should pull away or lean into it or acknowledge in some way that this moment is happening. But I don't. Instead, I sit frozen, acutely aware of every sensation. The texture of denim under his palm, the slight tremor in my hands as I grip the edge of the table, the way my heart seems to have relocated itself to my throat. This is not studying. This has nothing to do with urban renewal or federal housing policies or any of the work that ostensibly brought us here. This is something else entirely, a line being crossed, a door being opened, a question being asked without words. And in the space of that eternal moment, surrounded by the dust and silence and history contained in these walls, I understand that everything has changed. That whatever existed between us before, friendship, companionship, the easy comfort of shared routine, has transformed into something that will require new words, new rules, new ways of being in each other's presence. His hand doesn't move. Neither do I. And in that stillness, in that perfect, terrifying suspension of time and possibility, I feel the first tremor of something I'm not ready to name. The snow continues falling outside, and somewhere in the building, a clock ticks toward tomorrow. I wake most mornings to the smell of rising bread. The bakery below my apartment starts work at 4:30, and by the time my alarm sounds at 7, the entire building is infused with the scent of yeast and flour and something faintly sweet that might be cinnamon or vanilla. I've grown to love this ritual of waking, not to harsh light or traffic noise, but to the quiet industry of people making something useful with their hands. My apartment is small enough that I can stand in the center and touch opposite walls if I stretch. One room that serves as bedroom, living room, and study, with a kitchen barely wide enough for one person and a bathroom I have to enter sideways. The rent is manageable on my graduate stipend, and the location puts me within walking distance of campus, which matters more than space when winter settles over the city like a heavy blanket. I'm 24, which feels simultaneously old and impossibly young depending on the day. This is my second year in the graduate history program, specializing in 20th century urban development. The work suits me. It requires patience, attention to detail, and long hours spent alone with primary sources and half-forgotten municipal records. I spend 3 afternoons a week in the university archive, a basement room filled with filing cabinets and the particular musty smell of old paper, helping to digitize city planning documents from the 1940s and 50s. My life has a certain rhythm to it. Morning lectures, archive shifts, evenings in my apartment with books spread across the small table I use for both eating and studying. I own exactly 4 plates, 2 coffee mugs, and a single pot that serves for everything from pasta to soup. On weekends, I sometimes walk to the art museum downtown or sit in coffee shops reading novels that have nothing to do with my research. It's a quiet existence, perhaps even sparse by some standards, but it feels right for who I am at this stage of my life. Nathaniel disrupts this careful order simply by existing. He's 27, which becomes apparent not in any dramatic revelation, but in small details accumulated over time. The way he talks about music from his teenage years places him in a different generation than mine, just barely, but enough to notice. He mentions jobs from his early 20s with the casual confidence of someone who has already lived through one version of adulthood and chosen to begin another. Before returning to school, he worked for 8 years in his family's carpentry business. He still carries the tools of that trade in his hands. Calluses across his palms, a small scar on his left index finger for what he casually mentioned was an encounter with a table saw during his first week on the job. When he writes, he grips the pen with the same deliberate pressure I imagine he once used with chisels and measuring tools. We met last semester during Professor Kelman's seminar on urban history, a class small enough that everyone was expected to contribute to each week's discussion. Nathaniel rarely spoke during those sessions, but when he did, his observations had a quality I envied, grounded, practical, informed by an understanding of how cities actually function rather than just how they appear in academic theory. While the rest of us debated zoning laws and federal housing policies, he would quietly mention what it was like to renovate buildings in different neighborhoods, how you could read the history of a place in the bones of its architecture. The library became our shared territory sometime in October. I can't remember who suggested it first, only that we both admitted to preferring work with company, but without the obligation of conversation. The reference section suited us because it was far enough from the main study areas to avoid the constant shuffle of undergraduates, but close enough to the periodicals that we could access whatever research materials we needed. Our table is positioned near the tall windows that face east toward the older part of campus. During morning sessions, light streams through the glass and illuminates dust motes floating in the air between us. In the evenings, when we usually meet, those same windows become mirrors reflecting the warm interior light back at us, making the space feel even more enclosed and private. The table itself bears the accumulated marks of decades of student use. Initials carved into the oak surface, coffee rings that have darkened the wood, small dents and scratches that form an archaeological record of nervous energy and late-night study sessions. We've claimed the chairs at the far end, away from the main walkway, where our routine has evolved into something approaching ritual. Nathaniel always arrives first. I'll find him with his materials already spread out, laptop open, notebook positioned at a precise angle, pen lying parallel to the page edge. He drinks coffee from a thermos that he refills from a machine near the circulation desk, technically against library policy, but overlooked by staff who have grown accustomed to our presence. When I sit down across from him, he'll glance up with a small nod, sometimes a quiet good evening, before returning to his work. Until that night, with the snow falling outside, I had never examined what drew me to these sessions beyond their practical value. Nathaniel was simply there, like background music you don't consciously notice until someone turns it off. His presence across from me had become part of the architecture of my routine, as essential and unremarkable as the heating system or the afternoon light. But now, sitting in my small apartment the morning after, I find myself replaying every detail of our months together with new attention. The way he sometimes hums quietly while reading, almost inaudibly. How he favors his right hand when taking notes, but reaches for things with his left. The fact that he always wears the same watch, silver with a plain leather band, and how he occasionally checks it not to see the time, but simply as a gesture, the way someone might worry a coin in their pocket. These observations feel different now, charged with significance I hadn't recognized before. As if I'd been collecting evidence for a case I didn't know I was building. The change begins 3 days after the library incident, though I don't recognize it as change at first. Nathaniel texts me on a Friday afternoon while I'm sorting through municipal records in the archive basement. The message is simple. Want to meet tonight instead of Tuesday? Exams coming up. I stare at the screen longer than necessary. We've never deviated from our Tuesday through Thursday schedule. The routine has become as fixed as my morning classes or my weekend grocery runs. But there's something in the casualness of his suggestion that feels deliberate, weighted with intention I can't quite identify. I text back yes before I can overthink it. That evening, we fall into our usual positions at the library table, but the atmosphere between us hums with a different frequency. Neither of us mentions what happened Tuesday night. His hand rests on his own side of the table, fingers wrapped around a pen or turning pages with careful precision. We work for 2 hours without incident, discussing nothing more significant than the approaching exam schedule and whether the library will extend its hours during finals week. But when we pack up to leave, he walks with me toward the campus exit instead of heading to his usual parking spot. The night air is sharp and clean, the snow from earlier in the week compressed into slick patches along the sidewalks. We move carefully, our breath visible in small clouds that dissipate quickly in the cold. We should part ways at the main gate. Instead, we find ourselves walking the long loop around the academic quad, past the darkened windows of lecture halls and administrative buildings. The campus takes on a different character at night, more intimate, almost secretive. Streetlights create pools of amber warmth every 50 feet, and in the spaces between them, the darkness feels intentional rather than absent. Our conversation meanders from the practical to the personal. He mentions growing up in a house where Saturday mornings meant the sound of power tools and the smell of sawdust. I tell him about the bakery below my apartment, how I've learned to distinguish between different types of bread by scent alone. Nothing profound, but the exchange feels significant in ways I can't articulate. By the time we reach the parking lot where his truck waits under a broken streetlight, an hour has passed without my noticing. He unlocks the door, then pauses with his hand on the handle. Maybe we should do this more often, he says. The studying, with exams and everything. The words hang between us in the cold air. I know he's not really talking about exams. The following week, we meet 4 times instead of our usual 2. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Sunday. Each session follows the same pattern. Productive work that gradually gives way to conversation, library time that extends into walks across campus, ordinary moments that feel charged with possibility neither of us acknowledges directly. It's during the Sunday session that everything shifts again. The library is nearly empty, most students having fled campus for the weekend. The reference section feels cavernous around us, our table an island of warm light in the larger darkness. We've been working for 3 hours when Nathaniel closes his laptop and suggests we continue at his apartment instead. The invitation is casual, practical. His place is closer than mine, he explains, and he has better coffee than the machine near circulation. But something in his voice suggests this isn't really about convenience or caffeine. I agree, though my heart rate picks up as we gather our materials. Nathaniel's apartment occupies the 2nd floor of a converted house 10 minutes from campus. The building has character in the way that older places do. Uneven floors, windows that stick slightly when opened, radiators that clank to life with their own particular rhythm. His unit is small, but feels spacious compared to mine, with actual separate rooms and furniture that suggests permanence rather than the temporary arrangements of student life. The living room contains a couch that has clearly seen years of use, but maintains its structural integrity, a coffee table marked with the rings of countless mugs, bookshelves built from reclaimed wood and metal brackets that look handmade. In one corner, a half-finished project leans against the wall. What appears to be the frame of a small cabinet, sanded smooth but not yet stained. An old record player sits on a low table near the window, surrounded by vinyl albums in various states of organization. The kitchen connects directly to the living space, separated only by a counter that serves as both workspace and dining table. We settle on the couch with our laptops balanced on our knees, close enough that I can smell his soap and the faint scent of wood that seems to cling to his clothes. The proximity feels both natural and electric. Every time he shifts position, I'm aware of the small distance between us, the way his leg almost but not quite brushes against mine. The work becomes secondary to the awareness of shared space. I find myself reading the same paragraph repeatedly while cataloging details. The way he unconsciously taps his fingers against his knee while thinking, how the light from his laptop screen illuminates the line of his jaw. The fact that he's wearing wool socks with a small hole near the left big toe. When we do talk, it's in voices lowered by instinct, as if we're afraid of disturbing something fragile that has settled in the room around us. He shows me the cabinet project, explains his plan to finish it for his sister's birthday. I tell him about the photographs I've been finding in the city archives, images of neighborhoods that no longer exist, families posed in front of buildings that were demolished decades ago. By the time we returned to the library the following Tuesday, something fundamental has changed in the space between us. Our chairs are positioned closer together. When he leans over to point out a passage in my notes, his arm brushes against my shoulder and doesn't immediately pull away. The contact feels deliberate, a continuation of a conversation we haven't yet learned how to have with words. Each touch is small, barely noticeable to anyone who might be watching. But I catalog them all. The way his foot hooks around the leg of my chair when he stretches, how his hand occasionally rests on the table close enough to mine that our pinkies almost touch, the moment when he reaches across me for his pen and his chest briefly presses against my back. We're creating a new language, building towards something neither of us has named. We don't speak of it the next morning. His text arrives at 8:15 while I'm standing in my narrow kitchen, waiting for coffee to brew. The message is ordinary, unremarkable. Library at 6 tonight? As if the previous evening had unfolded exactly as every other evening we'd spent together. I respond with a simple yes, but my fingers hover over the phone screen longer than necessary, searching for subtext in 6 words that could mean everything or nothing at all. When I arrive at our table that evening, Nathaniel is already settled in his usual position, laptop open, notebook angled with the same precision as always. He glances up as I approach, offers the same quiet greeting we've exchanged dozens of times before. For a moment, I wonder if I imagined the entire previous night, the apartment, the couch, the electric awareness that seemed to pulse in the space between us. Then I sit down and immediately notice that my chair has been moved. Not dramatically, not obviously, but perhaps 6 inches closer to his side of the table than its usual position. The adjustment is subtle enough that anyone else might attribute it to coincidence or the natural drift of furniture in a busy library. But I know better. This table has become our territory over months of careful routine, and every element of its geography is familiar to me. I don't mention the moved chair. Instead, I unpack my materials with deliberate normalcy, arranging my books and notes in the same configuration I always use. But I'm acutely aware of the reduced distance between us, how I can now see the words he's writing without having to lean forward, how our elbows occasionally brush when we both reach for something at the same time. The evening proceeds like any other, except for the small violations of our established boundaries that accumulate with quiet persistence. When Nathaniel leans over to point at a line in my textbook, his shoulder presses against mine for several seconds longer than necessary. When I hand him my pen because it has stopped working, our fingers overlap around the barrel, and neither of us pulls away immediately. These touches feel different from the accidental contact of shared space. They carry intention, weight, the suggestion of questions being asked without words. Later, during what has become our ritual walk around campus, we stop at the vending machines in the basement of the student center. The hallway is empty, fluorescent lights humming overhead, the only sound the mechanical whir of refrigeration units. Nathaniel feeds quarters into the drink machine while I lean against the opposite wall, watching him navigate the selection process with the same careful attention he brings to everything else. He chooses a bottle of water, then turns toward me with it already open. For a moment, we simply look at each other across the narrow space. The silence stretches, becoming something I can almost touch. I have the distinct impression that he's about to say something significant, something that will require a response I'm not sure I'm prepared to give. Instead, he offers me the bottle. I accept it, our hands overlapping briefly as the weight transfers between us. The water is cold, and when I drink, I'm aware that his lips touched the same opening moments before mine did. The thought sends heat through my chest that has nothing to do with the temperature of the beverage. We climb the stairs together, emerge into the main lobby where a few students cluster around study tables despite the late hour. The normalcy of the scene feels jarring after the charged atmosphere of the basement hallway. We walk toward the exit in companionable silence, but something has shifted between us again, another small boundary crossed. That night, I dream of his hands. Not the moment in the library when his palm settled on my thigh, but something more abstract, the shape of his fingers around a pen, the way he drums them against the table when thinking, how they looked wrapped around the water bottle in that empty hallway. I wake with the details vivid in my mind and the strange certainty that these dreams mean something I'm not ready to interpret. The pattern continues over the following days. Each library session brings new small intimacies that we never acknowledge directly. Our feet touch beneath the table, and neither of us pulls away. He rests his hand on the back of my chair while reading over my shoulder. When I stretch after a long period bent over my notes, he watches the movement with an attention that makes my skin warm. We develop a new ritual of walking to his truck together after our sessions, even though it means I have to backtrack to reach my own car. These conversations happen in the amber glow of parking lot lights, our breath visible in the cold air, and they feel more intimate than anything that transpires in a library. He tells me about the neighborhoods where he learned carpentry, houses that taught him to read the history written in foundation stones and roof lines. I describe the photographs I've been cataloging in the archive, the way a city's ambitions become visible in the architecture it chooses to preserve or demolish. One evening, as we stand beside his truck discussing the urban renewal projects that reshaped downtown in the 1960s, he reaches out and adjusts my scarf. The gesture is casual, practical. The wool has shifted and is leaving part of my neck exposed to the cold. But his fingers brush against my skin as he repositions the fabric, and the contact sends electricity down my spine. His hands linger longer than the task requires. I don't step away. Neither of us mentions these moments, but they accumulate like interest, building towards something that feels both inevitable and impossible to predict. We're learning a new language together, one composed entirely of touches that could be explained as accident or coincidence, but feel deliberate, as punctuation marks in a conversation we're still learning how to have. The library remains our sanctuary, the place where this careful dance can unfold under the protection of academic routine and scholarly purpose. But increasingly, I find myself looking forward not to the work we accomplish there, but to the small moments of contact that punctuate our sessions, the brief meetings of hands, the weight of his attention when he thinks I'm not looking, the growing certainty that we're both moving toward something that will require new words to describe. The storm arrives on a Thursday evening without warning, the kind of spring rain that transforms the campus into something from a different season entirely. By 5 o'clock, water streams down the library windows in sheets, and the gutters overflow with more volume than they were designed to handle. The temperature has dropped 15 degrees since morning, and students hurry between buildings with jackets pulled over their heads, unprepared for weather that belongs to March rather than late April. We've been working for barely an hour when the lights flicker. Once, twice, a brief stutter that makes everyone in the reference section look up from their books with the shared anxiety of people who have lost too much work to power outages. The lights hold, but the building feels less secure somehow, more vulnerable to the forces pressing against it from outside. Nathaniel closes his laptop with more decisiveness than usual. "We should go to my place," he says, "before this gets worse." The suggestion carries no pretense this time. We both know the library has backup generators, that the chances of losing power are minimal, that his apartment offers no practical advantages over our established workspace. But I pack my materials without hesitation, following him toward the exit with the feeling that something significant is about to unfold. The walk to his building takes twice as long as usual. Rain drives sideways across the open spaces between academic buildings, and we're forced to take shelter under every overhang and covered walkway we can find. By the time we reach his apartment, we're both soaked despite our careful navigation. Water drips from our hair onto his hardwood floors, and our shoes squelch with each step. He disappears into what I assume is his bedroom and returns with towels and a dry sweater that he offers without comment. The sweater is dark blue, soft from repeated washing, and carries the faint scent of laundry detergent mixed with something that might be cedar. When I pull it over my head, the fabric settles around me like an embrace. We arrange ourselves on his couch, as we have before, laptops balanced on our knees, the familiar ritual of academic work. But the storm outside creates a different atmosphere than our previous sessions here. Rain drums against the windows with increasing intensity, and the apartment feels smaller, more enclosed, as if we're sealed inside a vessel while the world beyond transforms itself. I'm reading aloud from a highlighted passage about federal highway construction when Nathaniel interrupts me mid-sentence. Do you think about that night? The question lands between us like a stone dropped into still water. I stop reading, the words trailing off into silence, and look up to find him watching me with an expression I can't quite interpret. Not nervous, exactly, but focused in a way that suggests he's been considering this moment for some time. The book remains open in my lap, but I've lost all sense of what I was reading. Outside, thunder rolls across the city, a sound so deep I feel it in my chest as much as hear it. The lights flicker again, and in that brief interruption of normal illumination, the space between us seems to contract. I know exactly which night he means. I've thought about it every day since it happened, replaying those moments in the library when his hand settled on my thigh and everything changed. But admitting that feels like crossing a line from which there might be no return. The silence stretches between us. Nathaniel doesn't look away, doesn't soften the directness of his question with qualification or explanation. He simply waits. And I realize that this is the conversation we've been building toward through weeks of careful touches and meaningful glances, through all the small intimacies we've shared without acknowledgement. Yes, I say finally. My voice comes out barely above a whisper, but in the quiet of his apartment, with rain providing the only soundtrack, it sounds loud enough. Something in his posture relaxes, as if he's been holding his breath without realizing it. He sets his laptop aside, the movement deliberate and final, and I understand that we've moved beyond the pretense of academic work. He shifts closer on the couch, close enough that I can see the flecks of green in his gray eyes, can count the small freckles scattered across his cheekbones. The space between us has become charged, electric with possibility, and the weight of truths finally being acknowledged. I've been thinking about it too. He says, the admission hangs in the air between us. Outside, the storm intensifies, rain lashing against the windows with renewed force, but inside the apartment feels suspended, removed from ordinary time and consequence. We're looking at each other across a distance that could be measured in inches but feels vast, unbridgeable except by choice. For a moment, neither of us moves. The revelation sits between us, acknowledged but not yet acted upon, like a door that has been opened but not yet walked through. I'm aware of my heartbeat, of the way breathing has become something that requires conscious attention, of how the sweater he lent me carries his scent and makes me feel wrapped in something that belongs to him. Then Nathaniel leans forward, slowly enough that I could stop him if I wanted to, deliberately enough that there's no mistaking his intention. The world seems to narrow to the space between us, to the few inches of air that separate his mouth from mine, to the choice that waits in that small distance. I don't pull away. When his lips touch mine, it's with the same certainty he brought to placing his hand on my leg that night in the library. No hesitation, no question, just the quiet conviction of someone who has thought about this moment long enough to know exactly what he wants. The kiss is gentle but not tentative, warm and present and real in a way that makes everything else fade to background noise. The storm outside, the academic work that brought us together, the careful routines we've built over months of shared space. All of it becomes secondary to this moment, this acknowledgement of something that has been growing between us whether we named it or not. When we break apart, the silence that follows feels different than any that has come before. Not empty, but full. Not waiting, but complete. The days that follow exist in a state of careful suspension. We continue to meet, continue our walks across campus, continue the routines that have structured our time together for months. But everything feels different now, charged with the memory of that rainy evening and the kiss that changed the fundamental nature of what we are to each other. Neither of us has spoken directly about what happened. The next morning, Nathaniel texts about meeting at the library as if nothing has shifted, and I respond with the same carefully neutral tone. But when we sit down at our table that evening, the air between us hums with new awareness. Every accidental touch carries weight. Every glance feels deliberate. We're learning to navigate this new territory, this space between acknowledgement and action. The kiss exists between us like a shared secret, something that happened but hasn't yet been integrated into the daily reality of who we are when other people can see us. In the library, surrounded by the familiar architecture of academic routine, we can almost pretend that nothing fundamental has changed. Almost. The pretense becomes harder to maintain as the days accumulate. I find myself watching him during lectures we both attend, cataloging the way he takes notes or how he positions himself in relation to other students. Does anyone else notice the careful distance he maintains? Can they see the way his attention drifts to me when he thinks no one is looking? My scholarship depends on maintaining a certain version of myself, focused, serious, uncomplicated by the kinds of personal entanglements that might raise questions or invite scrutiny. Graduate students exist in a precarious ecosystem where reputation matters more than talent, where the wrong kind of attention can derail years of careful planning. I've built my academic identity around being reliable, predictable, someone who can be trusted with research responsibilities and teaching assignments. This thing with Nathaniel threatens all of that. Not because anyone has noticed yet, but because I can feel how it's changing me. The way I move through the world feels different when I know I'll see him later. My attention fractures during seminars as I find myself thinking about his hands, his voice, the way he looked at me before that kiss. I'm becoming someone I don't recognize, someone whose priorities have shifted in ways I'm not sure I can control. The realization terrifies me. One evening, after we've spent 2 hours working in a silence that feels more tense than comfortable, Nathaniel walks me to my car instead of heading toward his truck. The parking lot is nearly empty, our footsteps echoing off the concrete in the cold air. When we reach my car, neither of us immediately moves toward goodbye. The overhead lights cast harsh shadows that make his face look older, more serious than usual. He's wearing the same dark green sweater from that first library evening, and I wonder if the choice is deliberate, a reference to the moment when everything began to change between us. "I need to ask you something," he says. The words hang between us. I unlock my car, but don't open the door, giving him space to continue while keeping escape within reach. "If you want me to stop, I will." The statement is simple, direct, but it carries implications that make my chest tighten. Stop what exactly? The careful touches that have become part of our routine? The charged silences that fill the spaces between words? The growing certainty that we're moving towards something that will require choices I'm not sure I'm ready to make. He's looking at me with the same steady attention he brings to everything else, waiting for an answer that will determine the shape of whatever comes next. I understand that this moment represents a crossroads, that my response will either close this door or open it wider than either of us might be prepared for. The reasonable answer is yes. Tell him to stop. Return to the safe boundaries of our original arrangement. Preserve the carefully constructed life I've built around academic achievement and emotional distance. I have goals, plans, a future that depends on avoiding exactly this kind of complication. But standing there in the harsh light of the parking lot, looking at this man who has somehow become essential to the rhythm of my days, I realize that reason has less influence over my choices than I once believed. The silence stretches between us. Somewhere across campus, a clock tower chimes the hour, and the sound carries clearly in the cold air. I think about the apartment above the bakery, where I'll spend the evening alone, about the careful routines that have defined my life for the past 2 years, about the version of myself I've worked so hard to become. Then I think about his hand on my leg that night in the library, about the certainty in his touch and the way it made me feel like someone I'd never been before. I think about the kiss, about the new language we've been learning through small touches and meaningful glances, about the possibility that some changes are worth the risk they require. I look up at him, meeting his gaze directly. "Don't," I say. The word emerges quietly, but it carries the weight of decision, of a door being opened rather than closed. The relief that crosses his face is subtle but unmistakable, and I understand that he's been carrying his own uncertainty, his own fears about what this means and where it might lead. "Don't stop," I clarify, though I know he understood me the first time. He steps closer, close enough that I can see my breath mingling with his in the cold air. For a moment, we simply stand there, looking at each other across the small distance that separates what we were from what we're choosing to become. The parking lot around us is empty. The camp is quiet in the way that only happens late at night, when most people have retreated to private spaces. We're alone with this choice, with the implications of what I've just said and what it means for the careful boundaries we've maintained for so long. When he reaches for my hand, I don't pull away. His fingers intertwine with mine, warm despite the cold air, and I feel the same electricity that accompanied his touch that first night in the library. But this time, there's no pretense of accident or coincidence. This time, the contact is deliberate, chosen, acknowledged. Standing there in the pool of harsh light, our hands linked and our breath visible in the space between us, I understand that everything has changed again, that the careful distance we've maintained is no longer possible, that whatever comes next will require new rules, new ways of being in each other's presence. The fear is still there, alongside the excitement. But stronger than both is the certainty that this choice, this quiet surrender to something I can't fully name, feels right in a way that overrides every practical consideration. Spring arrives gradually, then all at once. The snow that defined our early months together melts into muddy patches across campus, revealing grass that has been waiting beneath the ice since November. Trees that seem permanently bare begin to show the first tentative suggestions of green, and the air carries scents that belong to renewal rather than endurance. By late April, we've stopped pretending that our meetings are primarily about studying. The transition happens so gradually that I can't identify a specific moment when everything changed. One evening, we're discussing urban renewal policies with textbooks open between us, and the next we're sitting closer together, his hand resting on my knee while we talk about movies we want to see or places we might visit when the semester ends. The books remain on the table, but they stay closed more often than not. Our table in the library becomes a different kind of sanctuary. We still claim the same chairs at the far end of the reference section, still maintain the rituals that have defined our time together for months. But now the space exists primarily as a place where we can sit together without explanation, where our presence makes sense to anyone who might be watching. The academic context provides cover for something that has evolved far beyond its original boundaries. Other students probably assume we're a study group that has grown comfortable with each other. They see two graduate students sharing a table, occasionally leaning close to discuss a passage or point to something on a laptop screen. They don't notice the way his thumb traces small circles on the back of my hand when we sit side by side, or how our conversations have shifted from coursework to the texture of our daily lives. We've learned to exist in two versions simultaneously. In public, we maintain the careful distance of academic colleagues who have developed a working friendship. In private, we explore the new language we discovered that rainy evening in his apartment. These two realities coexist without contradiction, each one true in its own context. His apartment becomes our primary territory as the weeks progress. I spend more evenings there than in my own cramped space above the bakery. We've developed new routines that have nothing to do with graduate school requirements. I cook dinner while he works on carpentry projects, the sound of sanding or measuring providing background rhythm to my attempts at something more complex than pasta. He reads aloud from novels while I sort through research materials, his voice creating a soundtrack for work that no longer feels solitary. The half-finished cabinet project he showed me months ago is completed now, stained to match the wood grain and fitted with brass hinges that catch the light from his kitchen window. He started another project, something he describes as a bookshelf, but which seems to involve more complexity than any bookshelf I've ever seen. I like watching him work, the way his hands move with practiced certainty, how he measures twice and cuts once with the patience of someone who understands that good things require time. One evening in early May, as we sit on his couch with the windows open to let in air that finally feels warm rather than sharp, I realize that I haven't been to our library table in over a week. The recognition surprises me, not because I miss it, but because I don't. That space, which once felt essential to the architecture of my routine, has become optional. We've moved beyond the need for its particular kind of sanctuary. I mentioned this observation to Nathaniel, and he looks up from the book he's been reading, considering the implications. Do you think we should go back? He asks. The question isn't really about the library. It's about whether we want to revisit the place where this all began, whether returning might provide some kind of closure or completion to the story we've been writing together. We decide to go, though neither of us is entirely sure why. The library feels different when we walk through its familiar entrance on a Thursday evening in late spring. The reference section looks exactly as we left it. Same tables, same arrangement of chairs, same amber light pooling on wooden surfaces. Our table waits at the far end, unoccupied, as if it's been holding space for our return. We sit in our old positions, but don't unpack any materials. Instead, we simply exist in the space for a while, remembering what it felt like when this was the extent of our shared world. The silence between us carries the weight of everything that has happened since that snowy evening when his hand first settled on my thigh and changed the direction of both our lives. After an hour, we leave without having opened a single book. Walking back to his apartment, I understand that we needed to return not to reclaim that space, but to acknowledge how far we've traveled from where we began. The library table exists now as a point of reference, a marker of who we were before we became who we are now. That night, as we lie in his bed listening to rain start again outside, gentle spring rain rather than the driving storm that accompanied our first kiss, I think about the photographs I've been cataloging in the university archive. Images of a city that no longer exists, families posed in front of buildings that were demolished decades ago, evidence of lives that were fully lived in spaces that have since been transformed into something entirely different. I wonder if someday someone will find evidence of us in that library. Initials carved into wood, coffee rings on the table surface, some small mark that proves we existed in that space together. The thought pleases me more than it should. Nathaniel's arm rests across my chest, and I can feel his breathing settle into the rhythm of approaching sleep. Outside, the rain continues its quiet percussion against windows that belong to a space that has become ours rather than his. In the morning, there will be classes to attend, research to complete, the ordinary business of finishing a semester and moving toward whatever comes next. But for now, in the darkness of a room that smells like wood shavings and laundry detergent and the particular scent that belongs only to him, I'm exactly where I belong. The library table waits in its pool of amber light, empty but not forgotten, a monument to the place where we learned that some changes, once begun, transform everything that follows.